Hey everybody, welcome back to Terminus, the mortal shell of extreme metal podcasts. I am the death metal guy, aka pre-order the new Call of Duty to get the 1914 soundtrack pack for free.
Oh god. Oof. And I am the black metal guy, aka I specifically requested my third inoculation via suppository. I hear that greatly multiplies its potency.
Well, anything to avoid the nostril test again. Have you heard? I'm sorry, we've talked about this on the Discord. I've been talking shit about. Have you heard any of that new 1914 record that a lot of people are talking about now?
God, I might have checked them out years ago and been pretty underwhelmed. Isn't it kind of like this sort of weird pastiche music? Like sludge with occasional blast beats?
Oh, no. It's more like... It's on Napalm Records, which is just the perfect fucking place for it. You know?
There are a number of these, like, World War I bands, and it's hard to keep track of which ones are good. I think for the most part, they're not very good.
No, for the most part, they're not. 1914 is like... remember last year, we decided not to cover that new Panzerfaust record that was just this, pastiche of Magla and Behemoth?
Yes.
It's basically that. You know, it's just every mass market band crammed together in a single space. It's rough.
Yeah. That is... Yeah, I mean, the Metal Archives page is pretty rough, too.
Yeah.
Honestly, I can't believe these guys are Ukrainian. Somebody should be giving them wedgies.
It did kind of blow my mind when I realized that. That they...
Ukraine, the Finland of the East, is responsible for this?
You'd think they'd at least know how to write a fucking riff here and there, but apparently not.
Yeah.
So, beyond that, what have you...
Well, should we listen to a 1914 track?
Oh, fuck. Oh, God.
Is that worth it for the lulz?
Yeah, let's do it. And I fucking know the one. The one that was, like, the big single. Called And a Cross Now Marks His Place.
Oh, sick. If we play this, we can get a copyright strike, too, in addition to an NHS warning.
We get the copyright strike on literally everything we do.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but pull this one up and just let me see, like, where the... Okay, you gotta pull up the lyric video. It really adds to it.
Alright.
Just start it at, like, 40 seconds.
Okay, what's the song? Sorry, I was trying to make a funny joke.
And a cross now marks his place.
Okay, so it's the music video, and you want me to start where?
The official lyric video. Start 40 seconds in. We'll run it until we can't stand it anymore, which will be pretty quick.
Alright.
Alright, let's go.
Wait, do you want to run this as a reaction thing?
What?
Do you want to run this as a reaction thing, like run the clip under it?
Yeah, sure. Let's do that. You're gonna love it, dude. Oh, by the way, just a little prelude. I just want to say I saw multiple people online talk about, like, especially with the lyrics and everything, how powerful this was.
I'm ready for absolute power.
Absolute striking raw power. All right, 3, 2, 1.
Oh, somehow I sincerely regret to inform you.
Dude, the lyrics are taken from an actual letter written to a mom, dude. It's not funny.
Dude, I sincerely regret to inform you is like a lyric that only Ruins of Beverast could make sound heavy.
Yes.
It's...
Hey, bro, did you know war is bad and tough?
Oh, dude, this... Dude, this is sludge, or it's quote-unquote atmospheric sludge.
I don't fucking know. It's this horrible congealed mess of, like, everything.
Yeah, or it's a really slow Behemoth riff.
Oh, man. It's like... There's people listening...
Okay, and that's a lyric that Axis of Advance could make sound heavy.
Yes! God damn. Oh man, can you imagine all the...
Shit, the blast beats and the shelling.
Oh man, that's like really good editing, dude. Okay. I'm wrapping this shit. Okay, yeah,
we gotta.
Can you imagine in your head the guys in Behemoth shirts, like, and this song's played live, and that's a seriously important moment for them emotionally?
That's like when they go off.
That's
like when the push moshing commences.
That's like when they get home on Facebook and they feverishly write about, like, what a powerful experience it was to see 1914 open for fucking Halloween. You know, like, it's like, what a fucking absurd idea. Oh Jesus. Ukraine doesn't always bat 1,000, I guess.
No, it's all right, so...
Good music. What have you been listening to lately?
Well, there's weirdly a lot of through lines. I think tonight we've got kind of a shitposty show in general, and we've got some weird connective tissue between these bands. I thought, we were trying to think, like, well, what the hell have I been listening to? Unfortunately, a lot of the stuff I've been listening to is just shit that we should eventually cover on bonus episodes. So, I've actually been listening to lots of Trelldom, Tillet on It, which is fucking sick. That, for those of you who don't know, that's Gaul's band pre-Gorgoroth, and it is insane shamanic pagan black metal that anticipates a lot of stuff but sounds like nothing around today. And I've been listening to like that and Gorgoroth and Sorin and shit. But aside from that, I don't know. Today I decided I was in a sort of a specific kind of grim mood, and I listened to Amenra, who I've mentioned on the show a few times as an possible influence or connection for things, and I don't think you know.
I think you might have played a clip forever ago, but I never listened to them myself. I just know them as, like, related to other things.
Yeah, they're like a I actually, okay, I just googled it. I don't think we did. It's one of those things that's like so Euro in a genre that it wouldn't be your immediate thing to go to. But it's in this nexus of quote unquote atmospheric sludge or post metal bands. I think what we should say now is that these genres don't exist. Mm-hmm. And there are. It's one of those things. I mean, we've kind of said that about doom metal before. That like doom metal is like 6 different genres, some of which actually belong in other genres. Mm-hmm. If Neurosis is kind of just the world's most developed crust band, and then I would say something like Amun-Ra or Isis is kind of just like, or the early Isis or Amun-Ra is kind of like really slow 90s hardcore. And so this is one of those bands that is like quite, not great, but quite good, because the influences are pretty clear and they distill just one very specific feeling out of specific parts of these. You could basically get everything these guys have done from just certain stuff in Converge, Jane Doe and Before, strictly Jane Doe and Before, certain stuff in early Isis, and stuff in Neurosis. Like, that's pretty much it. And just like Slayercore in general, and make it really slow. But where they take that, they really emphasize the drone, and they do that in a way that creates some links to black metal, and relates. Yeah, well, we'll just leave it there for now. That's the intro spiel, and let's go to Nemelendel for a better version of the riff you just heard from 1914. So what'd you make of that?
I mean, it's cool. I mean, it reminds me of, I mean, like you said, it is kind of like Oceanic era ISIS, or, I mean, you know, it's easy to knock all that stuff now, but, like, honestly, a lot of that stuff that was coming out in the mid-2000s, this sort of juxtaposition of, you know, hardcore and sludge with little bits of post-rock and, you know, art music stuff here and there, really did make for some good albums, and that feels right in line with that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, I agree. I still swear by Oceanic. That's an awesome record. This is and the stuff before that is cool too, although I don't know it as well. It's actually earlier ISIS is even more like this, right? This, you can hear that this is kind of a more stripped down, ragged, punky version of what ISIS was doing on Oceanic, and their earlier stuff is a little like this. If you go back, I checked this is from their third record, Mass 3. I checked their second one today, and their like the 90s metalcore influences are like on the surface. But yeah, it's like, it's pretty cool. I mean, and basically like they specialize in the crushingly obvious, right? They're like, here comes the riff. Yes, it's the riff. Here is the bass. Yes, now the crash cymbal and the screaming. Ah, excellent, right? But it works, and they get this specific thing that's kind of like, it's very brooding, but almost extroverted brooding. Like, you know how those like a really, like those kind of dynamic metalcore bands have this kind of clawing your way out of a pit of despair kind of vibe? Mm-hmm. Yeah, this feels like more like the Euro-sensitive guy version of that. Yeah. So, and another funny thing about that riff, right, is you can tell they all their riffs sound kind of like that. They do get an incredible amount of mileage out of like the same 5 notes played with octaves. the occupational hazard of that kind of riff is never accidentally writing Kashmir or Schism by Tool. And you can hear them in that riff just dancing around both of those nimbly. It's okay, and then here's one more. This is I want to see what you make of this. This is the question is this is from their more... They put a new one out this year that I think is... I haven't had a chance to really go through, but sounds a little more just like Atmo and fluffy. But this is from Mass 6 in 2017, and here's a indulgent moment toward the end of the record that is pretty memorable. The question is, do they pull it off? Mm-hmm. This is a Solitary Rain. So what do you think of that?
I know what you mean, like, in terms of it being very indulgent, but, like, even without hearing the rest of the song, I'm guessing that there's a lot of a run-up and preparation for that. And
yeah,
it's more sensitive in Euro, but it's really not far off of what a band like Crowbar would do in kind of their most dramatic moments. So, yeah, that's fine. I mean, I'm not going to say that I love it or anything, but it's definitely not something that's like, leave the hall to me, you know?
Word. No, I mean, I also think it's pretty well done. It's like, I mean, you know that I am allergic to auto-tune, right? Especially weapons-grade auto-tune like that, right? But it's... I don't know, actually. The normalization of auto-tune as, like, default singer sound in pop is pretty bad. Maybe that's worse. Yeah, the idea of using auto-tune there is hilarious. He does a decent... They do a pretty cool thing with it, blending it with other stuff. Yeah, and that chorus hits a few times on the song, but it's towards the end of the record. I do think it's well prepared for. And once you've heard it, it's so, like, over the top that once you've heard it, you will not forget it, you know. It's I'm guessing it's an earned part, and I'm guessing there's a lot of, like, gnarly stuff on that record to probably make up for it. Yeah, for sure. Oh, and a thing for our fans, or do we have fans? Let's say listeners, Terminators. I don't know about fans.
When we go out in public and people recognize us, we greet them with a firm handshake, not a picture.
Yeah, we only have battle brothers.
Exactly.
A band that you might hear mentioned more often on this show is Vigadude, who are who share one or two members with Amenra.
Looks like they used to. I think they're not sharing anyone anymore.
Oh, they played live in Amenra and then they left it. Okay, they're
part of the same circle, though.
So yeah, Vigadude is an excellent, very modern black metal band that started as kind of like hyper intense blasting post black, and you can hear Vigadude taking that kind of post metal, or sorry, I canceled that word. Slow 90s hardcore octave drone, and using it as a basis for black metal. So they develop it towards stuff that works kind of like that in BM, like Marduk or Hate Forest or whatever. And if you haven't heard them, they're fucking awesome.
Have you heard anything off the new record, the singles that have come out?
Oh no. Is it not so good?
I have concerns.
Hail! This is Brandon from Cromlech, and you're listening to Terminus.
All right. And we are back with Chimaera by Phrenelith. Out now on Nuclear Winter, which is a very small, maybe not new label exactly, but a very small label headed by the dude from Dead Congregation, which immediately places Phrenelith in a kind of a time and a scene, right? Dead Congregation were kind of the heroes of like not like cavernous incantation worship, but like high speed, very fast, aggressive incantation based death metal, blasting death metal.
They were kind of like one of the first bands to really do the incantation worship thing in the new wave.
Yeah, and I think from what I remember, they were it was pretty impressive stuff.
It's good.
It was cool. Yeah.
Grace of the Archangels is a great record.
Yeah, fast, aggressive, catchy. So that's a whole era of stuff. And you know, their earlier Phrenelith's last record was 2017, and it came out on the tail end of this period when there were these different strains of incantation worship. And the other one, the kind of cavernous one, is represented by their old label, Dark Descent. Right, so their 2017 record, which is Desolate Endscape, was a Dark Descent thing. So very much a product of this earlier, I guess, earlier teens scene. I remember their last record, and it's been a while because there was a lot of hype around it. And at first I was like, oh, boring, sounds like Incantation. But, you know, a bunch of my friends liked it, so I checked it out, and I decided that it sort of won out by pure sort of, just by the performance, right? It was played very aggressively and was just sounded good and heavy. And I think to really figure out what they're doing on Chimaera, we should probably just recap something from Desolate Endscape, because I can barely remember how it sounds, and I want to make sure that that they sound like I've just described. So let's just, second track is usually a safe bet. Let's go with we'll listen to Deluge of Ashes, and it's a short one, so we'll just go with the whole thing. That was pretty sick.
Yeah, that was pretty good, actually.
Yeah, so I think something we both noticed going through that is that it is a lot more like Morbid Angel than I remembered.
Yeah, definitely. You can hear the Incantation comparison in like the bulk of the verses, but the way things get kind of tied off at the ends of phrases, and some of the wonkier sounding harmonic ideas are definitely like Covenant era Morbid Angel.
Oh yeah, some of that steep slowdown breakdown stuff is, even towards the beginning of the song, is very Morbid Angel.
Big slide riffs and stuff.
Yeah. And a thing that I guess marks them as doing this well here is it's very tuneful. It really is kind of centered on that kind of melodic, default extreme metal scale, right? Melodic minor, but done quite well with some atmosphere and inflection. But there's also a good use of really nasty chromatics of a kind that you wouldn't get in black metal, and choppy, aggressive rhythmic punctuation that you wouldn't get in black metal, right? Is that a fair characterization?
Yeah. I mean,
those kind of slithering, especially those slithering downward sliding trem riffs, and some of the really obscene double bass fills under that. Some of those passages at the beginning of the track I really liked.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, we always talk about, what's as death metal in recent years has trended more and more toward doing black metal things. What's the thing that death metal retains? Well, it's, intense kind of rhythmic variation and complexity.
And certain, willful maximalism and ugliness.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so that definitely has that, and then the back of the track gets a little more atmospheric, but it's not really directly drawn from BM. If anything, it seems more like kind of directly drawing from goth rock in the way that Earache did. And so I think the things that persist from this record onto Chimaera are that kind of gothy atmospheric stuff coupled with the big influence from Morbid Angel's Covenant.
Yeah, to a degree.
Or it reminded me a lot of Covenant. However, not a lot else persists, and it doesn't sound like Covenant.
No, because you always have to remember Covenant is like an insanely aggressive record.
Yeah.
In contrast,
it's also like one of your favorite records of all time.
Oh yeah. I mean, there's a lot of days where if you held a gun to my head, I would say it's my favorite Morbid Angel record. Chimaera, on the other hand, is possibly the least aggressive death metal album I've ever heard. It is kind of fascinating in that it features blast beats and growls and heavy tremolo riffs, but it does not convey any sort of abrasion or intensity, I guess. It's very odd. Did you get that vibe?
Yeah, I mean, as I told you before the show, I was curious what you thought of this, because, there's something that is I think we both found that it sort of whizzed by, and to a certain degree, this is because it's highly listenable music, and it sustains a certain mood. It's pretty good at the tunefulness on the Phrenelith is played up still more, but it definitely sounds like death metal, but it's a specific scowling, moody kind of doing black metal with death metal means thing. Kind of like a bit like the kind of mood that you'd get on Sepulchral Curse, especially in the kind of middle of that record from last year, or maybe some of the Hessian Firm stuff, but done in a much more kind of straight ahead way.
It's very streamlined, and all the rough edges have been sanded way off.
Highly streamlined, and the funny thing is I didn't even really pick up on the lack of aggression per se when I heard it, but as soon as you said it, that makes sense. And the thing that I picked up on is just, especially when we compare it with that last sample, right? It's like when they're on Desolate Endscape, they sound quite excited to be bashing the shit out of their instruments, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. The Chimaera does not sound excited. And there's kind of weird stuff going on with the riffing, where there are a bunch of good ideas, but deployed in kind of frustrating ways.
This is a very frustrating album to talk about. This is an album that does nothing wrong, per se. Mm-hmm. But it is also like we were talking before the show. So this is a pretty short record. This is just over half an hour, and I after I listened to it for the first time, I had to put it on again immediately, just because like it just blew past me the first time. I was trying to concentrate and listen on it, but my attention just kept slipping away. And usually, there's things that kind of like snap you to attention, especially in a death metal record. There's a big dramatic moment or something, but it feels like those have been almost deliberately excised to create this very steady, very smooth continuum of sound.
Dude, atmospheric death metal, bro.
Is this atmo death? Is this post?
It must be. The thing that it's a little bit like, although in a kind of opposite way, is Sulfur Aeon.
Oh yeah. I mean, I get that, definitely. I mean,
but Sulfur Aeon has massive sort of shameful hooks, right? You'll be like, this is sick, and feel like really dirty. Whereas this does not have that kind of engaging.
Is this ulcerate for people who are too old school for ulcerate?
Oh, interesting.
Is this what happens when you want like kind of arty, like upper middle brow death metal, but you still can't stand like keyboards and fucking like noise rock interludes and shit,
or lots of weird notes.
Yeah. It's like I was also saying before the show, it's like, so the whole Dark Descent sound is something I've never really been into. I understand that it had its place, and there was like a utilitarian quality to it in like the late 2000s to early 2010s of like, okay, let's get back to Incantation, let's get back to kind of more highbrow Euro death metal, like Finnish death metal, stuff like that. It definitely had its place. My thing was I didn't find most of it especially interesting. Because, the sense that I always got from it is like, if there were a lot of bands in Brooklyn in that era that were art kids trying to impress metalheads, this felt like a lot of metalheads trying to impress art kids. You know what I mean?
And it worked, because by the latter, by the teens, you started to get all those triangle bands, right?
Yes. Oh, the fucking triangles. Yes.
Right. You can see how like the whole sort of there's a whole kind of fancy, highly polished Euro festival black death metal scene that is influenced partly by like Orthodox BM and partly by Dark Descent, and some of that has matured into the better examples of the Ortho Cavern sound, and some of that has remained in the Triangle Zone.
Yeah. So I guess ultimately what I'm saying about this is that I'm sure there's an audience that this appeals to, but I just find it really weird and sort of just like intensely unexciting, which is not a good place for a death metal record to be. Like, death metal's supposed to be exciting and like immediately engaging, and I don't think that's what this is going for. And you know what, maybe that's the thing, maybe I just don't really get it, but it feels like the style they are playing in is at cross purposes with their objective musically,
Yeah, okay, so we should do some sampling.
Yeah.
Let's go to here's from early in the record. This is Chimaeran Offspring Part 1, just right from the beginning. my feeling with that track is it's just like such a it's such a tease. Like it starts out with this kind of big speed metal-y death metal riff of a kind that I think used to be common, like when I was a kid, but that like has completely disappeared. Who would you associate that like? Is that like a Behemoth thing?
Dude. It's nothing. It's not a riff. It's a fucking
exactly.
It's half of an idea.
No, this is the thing. The song starts with that, and I think, okay, this is the preliminary version of a massive speed metal death metal riff that is going to show up in immediately or later in the song. The weird thing is, they go on to do something it never does. The rest of the track is built around basic intervals from rhythms from that first riff. You can hear that in the sample I selected, that riff recurs once in a transition in exactly the same roll it plays at the beginning, maybe with rolls under it instead of blasts. And then at the very end of the track, they just play that little lick again, and the song ends. And what they do throughout is it's like this. It's like a sophisticated technique employed against itself. They're like, yes, we are going to develop the whole song out of this initial motif. But the problem is that all of the riffs that are built from it are worse than it, and the real version of that riff never materializes. And so, if the goal of a death metal track is to be heavy, ripping, and exciting, it does not succeed in that.
It is fascinating, like, concentrating on it, like, with the specific timestamps, because it's like, Jesus Christ, there's like 2 riffs over the course of half the song that we just played. They're worked around the fretboard, and you'll have like, ooh, this is the kind of doomy version and stuff, but melodically, there's nothing happening.
Dude, at the end, right, we got the sort of dissection-y trem version, dissection, or a couple songs on Covenant trem version, right? The sort of right? They blasted it for a while. And then they just dropped to the breakdown, and the breakdown isn't even a variation on it. It's just 8 more reps of the same thing.
Yeah, I think that, what does this materially sound like? I think that a lot of this record sounds like Dismember, like, heard through a wall. It's like...
Whoa, that's... Huh. Oh, I guess that's a little... Well, that intro... I guess I hear what you mean. It's a little bit like the override to the overture lead.
Or, well, that would be the most obvious example, but like those kinds of like little just flickering kind of speed death metal things were all over early Dismember. But the thing is, Dismember would like, they would take that and they would turn into a really elaborate, really long lead line. That would be this whole kind of suite of melodic ideas before the song would start proper. Here they just took the first 4 seconds and looped it.
They'd also have charging head through the wall D beats.
Yeah, exactly. That's why Dismember is the best Swedeath band.
Yes, rhythmically it's completely different from this. So, and some of these guys, right, are in a pretty solid Swedeath type band, right? They're in Undergang.
Yeah, Undergang is like pretty good. Like. Undergang is,
and he says that as someone who hates Swedish death metal. So
Undergang is like the parallel universe version of Grave that I like, basically. Pretty much, it's just like deliberately moronic, bit crushed HM2 DB death metal, but it's like it's pretty fucking good for what it is. Here, it's just like. That, you know what that really sounds like? That whole song sounds like a jam session gone terribly wrong. It's like, ooh. Like the guitar. Yeah, you know what I mean, though? It's like the guitarist is like, it's like, oh man, I got this kind of like cool lick that I'm working on. He starts playing it, the drummer keeps going, and it's like, okay. And then before you know it, the song is done, quote unquote, and they're like, fuck it, no need to go back over that, boys. We're done. We struck gold with this one.
Yeah. I hear what you mean.
Okay, well, let me do a different sample. So the thing is, there's like flickers of kind of cool things that happen across this record. So we're gonna go to a song called Gorgon Head, which has an interesting kind of subtle expand contract thing happening, an almost grind style thing early on in this sample. This is just from right in the middle of the song, and then you're gonna get some kind of conventional sort of dark descent style tremolo riffs, but some of the more solid ones on the record. So there is good stuff here, but I think what we're getting at is a lot of the big problems here are structural in nature. Because as much as I like some of the individual pieces that are happening on this sample, the song just never really goes anywhere, sort of like the last one. So let's check this out, and I'll get into it a little bit more. So the first half of that sample, there's a lot of stuff that I like going on. I mean, I'm not going to say those are like brilliant riffs, but they're pretty good. They're getting moved around and varied enough. They're not being beaten into the ground 8 times in a row. So there's variation going on. There's some rhythmic play going on, some interesting kind of speed up, slow down stuff occurring. That's all pretty cool. But then it all kind of gets derailed in the back half of that sample, and it's like, oh, okay, now we're going to sync and just play with these same couple riffs over and over again. And that's the consistent thing across this record, it's that it's motionless. Not even the sense of like, the band's going around in circles structurally. It's like it's never going anywhere. It just sinks. You know?
Yeah, I get that. Like, so, I mean, a part I found the highlight there would be, I mean, there was a lot of things happening very quickly at the beginning of the sample, and it was cool. Mm-hmm. Something pretty cool was just after the 2-minute mark, around 2:10 or 12, you're getting these sort of like, I mean, I would almost hear them as kind of immolation-y, these kind of like double bass and tom rolls with, and then like this kind of, just the drumming and the rhythmic figures is immolation-y, with this kind of like squiggling incantation-y leads over the top, kind of frantic, and you get a really good, over the top of that, and like that's intensity. You can hear some focus there, and and you know, some scorn and stuff, and then it drops, and that dum bum bum dum 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 dum, you know, that part is pretty heavy. But then instead of playing that like 4 times, right, they play it 8 times, and it goes from kind of breakdown to almost the death metal equivalent of the dreaded beatdown trudge riff. Mm-hmm. And it keeps going. And then when they try to crank it up and bring back the vocals again, after that,
they can never recapture the momentum.
No, it literally feels like they're forcing it, like they're dragging the song uphill, and it's in fact what happens. They do another one of those sort of like escalating roll things, and it feels like they're pushing the melody uphill in a like a Sisyphus kind of way. And then they get to the top, and they just drop down into the same dum 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 thing from the breakdown they just needed to escape from.
That's the thing, is like there's like no riffs on this record that can sustain themselves longer than 4 repetitions.
That seems very fair. Yeah, and so what you would need to get out of that part, right? The only way you could earn playing that riff for that long would be just you have to crank up the adrenaline. You just start blasting, like play anything over it, but you have to start blasting or something, right?
I'm starting to also think that one of the crucial issues with this album is the production, which is so kind of like remote and quiet and muffled and soft. You know, there's no abrasion on this whatsoever. Like, there's no harshness to it. But, you know, kind of getting back to the idea of, you know, repeating riffs, do you think this music would be more sustainable if they just kind of cut everything in half and just made, like, kind of wonky 2.5-minute death metal songs?
God. Well, that does set up my next sample quite well.
You weren't supposed to say it. It was such a good set. I give you the perfect segue, and you have to lampshade it for the whole fucking audience.
I was doing the segue. That was the segue, buddy. Look, all right. It turns out that the lampshade was the segue we were looking for the whole time. But it's literally about a lampshade and a scooter. Anyway, so this next one is Cocytus, but spelled in the ancient Greek riff, and it is very short. So we're gonna listen to the whole damn thing.
So when you cut it down to 2.5 minutes, it just becomes half a song.
Yeah, like, so, and the funny thing, like, and that's the, and I think as far as things that have, like, memorable melodies, if you listen, I've listened to this record, like, 3 or 4 times, probably. That is the track you'll remember. You know, that sort of, you know, they do that kind of simple Morbid Angel riff and then turn it more epic on the second half. Okay, that's a fine idea. They do that kind of doom down 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 down, right? Okay, that kind of big majestic thing works pretty well. It's kind of like Mount Sinai Moloch or some Ruins of Everast thing. All right, I accept that. That's cool. But that song has you know, then it's got that dum 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 dum. I'm really out of tune today, or I'm just like humming the wrong notes, especially wrong notes. But that kind of thing that's just scale runs down is not a very good riff, right? But the track is basically those 3 riffs, and it just cycles back on itself in exactly the same way as the other songs do, right? So it's like, if this were gonna work, it would have to go somewhere from the end of the track. Like, okay, those big melodic arpeggiated riffs are like pointing us towards the vast ruined citadel or something, right? But it's like we see the vast ruined citadel, but it's not actually an accessible map feature.
Yeah,
You know,
it's it's a texture on the skybox on the distance. Oh man. Well, okay. So real quick, last one. So I really do think that, okay, melodically, most of this record isn't exciting, but it's serviceable. But I'm starting to think one of the crucial issues that's like afflicting so many of these riffs is like a complete lack of rhythmic variation. And don't confuse when they slow it down and do the Doom version with the held chords for rhythmic variation. That's a fucking cop out, you know. I'm talking about riffs with like real internal rhythmic gestures too. Yeah. Which I think is kind of crucial for good death metal. So let's go to Chimerian Offspring Part 2. Because, you know, that's what wraps it up. That's what turns it into an epic, I guess, is when you have a Part 2. So we'll go about 2-3 minutes in. So you're going to hear, again, a bunch of riffs that are not bad, but you're going to hear lots of, we've got the dark melodic phrase, now let's play it a step down to make it darker. And what is the... this top of the pops, boys. And you know where we used to hear that? In stock black metal records in the mid-2000s. You know how sometimes you'll talk about, like, lead phrases that are, kind of like searching or groping toward where they're supposed to move? Until this point, I had never heard that in a 4-note death metal riff.
Yeah. So you're talking about what struck me where there was the contrast between the blasted riff at the beginning and then the mid-tempo ones following.
The blasted riff at the beginning is the first, like, complete riff on the album.
I was going to say, that is the first, we're in the last track, and that's the first time I'm like, oh, this is the same band that wrote the first album.
Yeah.
Like, although there are a bunch of surface characteristics and interval choice and, whatever influences that link it to the first one, it almost doesn't sound like the same band. That first riff, right? Okay, great. Excited, clear-cut blast riff, lots of good, wild variation in intervals, like big leaps, strange chromatics that actually do the incantation thing. Okay, you can hear how these guys are Scions of Dead Congregation or whatever, and there was some really cool sort of like tripping fills on the drums under that, where it's like, oh, so, and the riff and because the riff has that exaggerated squiggly form, okay, there's some internal rhythmic variation even in the riff and in the drumming, and then it's immediately like they hit the suck pedal, right, and drop halftime.
Yeah. I think that if you get all the way to the end of your record and what you've got to offer after your big drop is dun 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 dun, fuck it, man, I'm going out for a smoke.
Country is going straight to hell.
The sooner he is exterminated, the better.
boys and girls, we are back. And what better way to close out the evening than with a slab of grueling, sadistic funeral doom. In an extremely surprising release that basically was just announced as it was coming out about a month ago, we have the second full-length record by Stabat Mater titled Treason by the Son of Man. Stabat Mater is one of the many projects of Mikko Aspa. It has been around for about 20 years now, and I've mentioned them in passing on the show a few times and in a little bit more detail in our Torture Doom bonus episode. Again, second episode in a row. I forgot to do any housekeeping. I have social media. We're real underground now. We don't talk about that anymore. Stabat Mater is a very extreme, very unique funeral doom band. And this is only the second full-length record that's been released under that project's name. Stabat Mater had a history of... did a bunch of splits in the mid-2000s. First full-length was in 2009, self-titled Wonderful Record, and then it basically lay dormant until now, apart from a compilation release in 2016 of a lot of previously recorded material. So this is, unsurprisingly, released on Northern Heritage, Mikko Aspa's label. And, first new material by Stabat Mater in 12 years. Just comes out of nowhere, and here it is. You don't have any exposure to Stabat Mater except for the little bit that I played on the Torture Doom episode, right?
Yeah, which I cannot remember.
Oh, yeah. Well, that was just extremely oppressive, kind of droning, just trudging funeral doom stuff. I love it, but obviously that is an acquired taste.
And I thought this record would sound like that, right? I thought this was going to be an extremely focused Torture Doom genre exercise, focused on being, grueling and hideous, right? In a way that maybe I could approve. I would say, death metal guy, this is horrible, and you would say, that's why I fucking love it, and I'd say, good point, well, understood, have a nice day.
Yes.
And that would be the review, but instead, I listened to this and I really liked it.
Yeah, well, it's kind of interesting because, I talked about Stabat Mater within the context of Torture Doom in this kind of, chronological study of that little niche style. But what I didn't really talk about was how the project developed after that really early material. Stabat Mater was definitely within that niche early on, but then branched off and kind of started doing its own thing. The big one that I would say would be the Stabat Mater track on the Crushing the Holy Trinity split. That six-way one with Deathspell Omega, and it has the first Magla material.
So that had Stabat Mater too.
Yeah, that had Stabat Mater's Above Him on it, which is honestly probably top 10 funeral doom songs of all time. It's an absolutely incredible track.
And for those of you listening who may not be familiar with this, Torture Doom is a sub-genre of funeral doom. So this is both a Torture Doom and a funeral doom band.
Yeah.
Let's continue.
Well, if for the 20 people that remember Torture Doom as a thing, well, we've got a 3-hour episode for you guys, so give us money on the Patreon. You can listen to it. Actually, no, fuck that. That one's free now, so you guys can just go listen to it. Yeah, that one's publicly available now. Stabat Mater evolved and became this fascinating, very... Well, it's challenging to describe because there's a lot of sounds within Stabat Mater. You have extremely oppressive, dense, kind of torturous and noisy doom stuff, but you also have this, incredibly, powerful yet sorrowful lead guitar-driven stuff. And both of those sounds are present on this record, and a lot of the times interacting with each other and sort of in conflict and resolution with each other throughout these three very long songs. I mean, how would it, maybe it's a little easier from the outside. How would you describe this in terms of, people that aren't like weird funeral doom autists like me? Like, what's a good way to describe this music?
Well, I mean, yeah, okay, well, maybe if I can't... I was going to use the word funeral doom. I was going to say, if the torture doom tag didn't exist, right? Let's say at least most of our listeners are probably at least familiar in passing with skepticism or the Thurgathon, right? Or something like that. So you could just call this raw funeral doom. In that it has the fully metallized quality you get on both Stormcrow Fleet and on the latest Skepticism. That is, a lot of these riffs are anchored in chugs, but it also it rarely delves into ugliness for the sake of ugliness, and it often kind of opens up into moments of sort of monumental beauty, right?
Yeah.
And even the chugging stuff, I would say, for the most part, isn't ugly per se. It's just powerful and driving in a way that surprised me. But like raw compared to, say, the sound on Skep. Well, okay, the Stormcrow Fleet is kind of raw in its own way, but it's it's a thinner, more torture doomy tone. As far as the wing of torture doom you'd align this with, it would have to be the Tomb of the Ancient King type thing, right? With Wormphlegm, where it's more tuneful and riff oriented. But you could equally compare this to something like Ruins of Everast, I think, in terms of the general scope that's being explored and the mood.
I think scope is a really important word for these songs. I mean, just because this review is going to feature some of the longest samples we've ever had on the show, but they necessarily have to be, because so much of what makes these songs interesting and unique is about the structural scope of them, about the sort of agonized process of returning to motifs and exploring different dimensions of ideas. This is actually a very intricate and complex record, even if, moment to moment it just sounds like funeral doom. The actual arrangement of these songs is really sophisticated, I think.
Yeah. They seem like they could have been written over a very long time.
It's been 12 years. The first one. So basically half of this record is dominated by the first track, By the Seed of the Sun, which is 18 minutes long and sounds like it was a multi-year ordeal to write. Because I remember saying on the Torture Doom episode that I've tried to write music like this, and it is incredibly difficult to get your brain as a songwriter to operate in scales this long when you're used to working in 5-minute increments. It gets exponentially harder the more time you add on to it, especially as you try to keep up a certain level of complexity and intricacy within the songwriting itself. But Miko really pulls it off in an amazing way, creating these full narrative, almost cinematic experiences within these very long time frames.
Yeah, so here, let's go to By the Seed of the Sun, then. This is 3 minutes and 33 seconds in, and it is... the song is 18 minutes, so that definitely counts as the beginning of the song. This will highlight the thing. So a thing that if you follow the show you might know about me is that I'm not a big fan of certain kinds of plotting, really spaced out chord avant doom stuff, whether it's torture doom or, Khanate or shit like that. You know, the stuff that's just like chung, chung. You know, this doesn't even approach that, and so here's some of the chugging stuff. There's all this rhythmic space is opened up by the slow tempos, and he's very often filling it. Well, he's always filling it in meaningful ways, and he's very often filling it in with like kind of aggressive chug. So here you're going to hear him laying down the basic pattern, and then he builds it up through, I think, 2 variations. This is what you can hear there from the beginning is the mutes really depend on this kind of like half muted octave drone. You immediately traced that to a funny source that I hadn't thought of.
I said, well, you like this part because it sounds like High on Fire. It was interesting.
Yeah.
When I listened to this record, I knew you were going to sample that. I just knew it immediately because that is that's like a stoner metal thing, almost the syncopating the strum onto the upbeat rather than the downbeat. and as well as the sort of exaggerated, like, slowed down kind of swing time fills at the end of the repetitions. There is a reason to have a real drummer in this style of music, because you can do stuff like that.
Yeah, so does he have a drummer now? Or is this totally one man?
Oh, Miko is a drummer. I mean, like, like in Clandestine...
No, I know he also drums.
Yeah, in Clandestine Blaze, he does all his own drums for that. I don't know if he does drum machines for anything. I think he takes pride in doing his own drums for all of his one-man projects.
No, I know he drums. I was wondering if there was a drummer he was playing with. It looks like it's just him. So, so about that initial drone riff, right? So you thought High on Fire. I think that is right, and especially that kind of like drawn out, taut syncopation there. I can't count, so I couldn't distinguish between the upbeat and the downbeat. But not entirely true, but in that context, I'm just like, it sounds.
Well, you can
good.
hear how it's like it's a little bit behind the drum beat, the strum.
Yeah, they're doing the stretchy thing, or he's doing the stretchy thing. But the funny thing is, it also really sounds a lot like that Amenra the track that we sampled at the beginning of the show. It sounds like High on Fire and sort of sludge stuff, and it also sounds like the more kind of droning textured stuff that also got called sludge at that time, like the earlier Isis stuff, or like Neurosis or Amenra. And so it's really tapping into a sense of heavy groove that is not only kind of alien from this niche neck of extreme doom metal, it's kind of a whole different neck of the woods entirely. And then the way he develops that, it sort of turns into, you can hear something that we heard and were really interested in on the last Clandestine Blaze record, right? which came out earlier this year and we quite liked, which is that Miko seems to hear Celtic Frost as a second wave black metal band. Or to hear he does not do the thing where you put them in the first wave ghetto or something. And so as the riff gets more textured and he starts to, it starts to have more of a triplet, of this sort of rolling triplet feel in it. Gets a little more intense, and it gets a little more, it's not just the octaves now, it's not just root and octave ringing, right? We're at he's starting to do those sort of 2 or 3 2-string chord partials that make a black metal riff, right? As he starts to do that, right, it's like, oh, this is a little sort of BM sounding, and then at the end of the phrase, he just does these monster bends, right? And a really cool thing that I didn't notice till we were listening again is that he'll do those bends, he'll do it once after the first rep, and then maybe bend twice after the second, and then 4 times or something.
Just keep pushing it out, yeah.
Yeah, and it's crushing. I mean, I was headbanging when I was listening to that. And eventually, I sort of had the whole chronology of this thing wrong. And this is, I guess, testifies to what you meant about the difficult structures here. I thought it then immediately built up to a more epic, kind of Clandestine Blaze sounding riff. It does not. It drops back to the original sort of single note octave drone. And then he starts doing the sort of black metal bendy riff again. And finally, just at the end of that sample, he starts ascending a little bit higher on the fretboard, and suddenly you get some minor 6 in there or whatever, and you get a bit of that sort of Clandestine Blaze sort of, dark majesty vibe. And then he bends it again. Bam! And then I told Death Metal Guy to keep running the sample for a minute, because I wanted to get another rep of that riff. He just goes back to the last variation. He does. I think maybe he does the epic riff twice, and I missed the first iteration, but I'm not sure. Basically, if you really start looking at it, it becomes dizzying, and it becomes sort of fractal structure or something.
Oh, well, I mean, something that's very hard to tell the first couple times you listen to this album. I think I listened to this like 3 or 4 times before this review. But even now, listening to this, I was listening to it like on my commute the other day, of all things. What a dismal way to start your workday. Jesus Christ.
Well, you always remember that your work, maybe that's why work has been a bit better for you this week. It feels better in comparison.
Comparison to listening to Stabat. One thing that I just realized listening again to the specific section is that every time he's playing that riff, he's modifying the chords that he's using every single time. He's transforming the nature of the riff. It's like he's always starting with this root chord, this simple like octave chord that he's using, but then he's throwing in different intervals when he modifies the chords afterwards. So it's like you'll have one take that's like, a little bit more sorrowful. You'll have one that's a little bit more dissonant and aggressive. It's fascinating. He's building a narrative even within this structure that at first blush sounds extremely repetitive, extremely kind of trudging. But no, there's a world of things happening even within that section that is basically just the same thing structurally over and over again.
Yeah. I could hear some of that variation that he was doing. I didn't realize it was on every single version of those textured chords, but that is cool. And there's something about the time scale that allows you to do that too, right? If you're writing down the line riff-based black metal, it actually might sound kind of weird to have a variation on every single rep of the riff.
Yeah. But when a rep takes 30 seconds to get through,
it becomes a statement in it. And when they're sort of separated off by those bends, it becomes kind of, a statement in itself. It's like, it's like the riff sequence is actually like the 4 bars of chug, rather than like the riff itself. Anyway, So it also has this similarity. I guess we've already sort of talked about it, to these kind of droning things that should not be called post-metal or atmospheric sludge. So just like slow hardcore, droning slow hardcore. And it might seem like a weird stretch connection, but like, listen to the beginning of the next track, Embracing the Slavery.
Which I think at this point, thinking back on knowing what we're about to play, these samples, this might be one of my favorite songs of the year. Possibly This is an incredible achievement, this song. This is possibly the best Stabat Mater song, next to Above Him.
That makes sense to me. I was also floored by this. I mean, the album in general was just a really unpleasant surprise. And this track... This track is definitely just massive. It should, it should have some sort of year-end status in itself.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So, let's listen to the beginning of Embracing the Slavery. Okay, so pretty cool sinister turnaround at the end there. But before that, The first time I heard that, I was like, what the fuck? Like, that sounds like a clean interlude passage on early aughts ISIS, or even like something like Godspeed. The guitar parts in Godspeed You Black Emperor. And I think, like, I didn't even notice the octave droning on the chug riffs the first time through, and then when I went back to the sample, I was like, "Oh, okay, like this makes sense." I thought I thought that was a weird stretch connection, right? But I swear that stuff is some kind of influence here. But what makes it different? Well, even if we just isolate this phrase, it's got a shape to it that is specifically metallic. It's multiple phrases, and it resolves in a way that is very strong. Dun, 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 dun. It's a long, slow, extreme metal riff, and if you, although it has that kind of grandiose epic vibe too, long, slow, extreme metal riff, and if you really sort of listen carefully, you can already hear a version of this that is just blasted and tremmed out, or just pounded out with power chords or whatever, right? And
yeah,
so
if you did a trem version on a long black metal song, that would be the climactic moment of that song, you know?
Yeah, and it might even sound kind of like Into Oblivion or something, like a more melodic moment on there, right? More consonant moment. So he pulls it off with, and because of that kind of metal delivery, he pulls it off in a way that divorces it from the great weak spot of the Isises and Godspeeds of the world, especially Godspeed. And Isis got more and more like this over time, but that kind of that sentimentality or the preciousness, like, wow, this music we're making, it's so fragile, so beautiful, right? You don't like this. This is not about that at all. It takes the best of those ideas from those bands and recontextualizes it in a cool way. Now let me punch it over to the death metal guy.
Well, so the thing is, like, this is not unprecedented in Stabat Mater's later work. Like, a lot of his songs are based around, like, single, simple lead lines that keep recurring as a motif, and they tend to, they have the melodic quality of a more delicate music, but what it always conveys to me, especially within the context of the songs and the albums they appear, is a sort of, like, agonized sorrow. It's sadness, but it's always through pain. It's always through suffering. Which, not to get too far off track, we were talking a little bit off air about personal theories about Mikko Aspa's interest in music. Him talking in interviews about certain projects of his being about obsession. And I think that Stabat Mater, in a large part, is about obsession with a very sort of personal suffering, filtered through, usually, stories about the suffering of Christ and the suffering of the Virgin Mary, etc. So whenever you hear a lead line like this, it's never without power, because we're talking about things that are, like, massive and eternal in scope. We're talking about supernatural suffering. We're not talking about a girlfriend leaving you, We're talking about cosmic pain, about kind
cosmic
of
pain. That's your new aesthetic.
Cosmic pain.
Everyone's talking about fucking cosmic death metal, cosmic black metal, weebly woobly woobly, cosmic pain.
Yeah, it kind of gets back to just ideas about just like Weltschmerz and sort of like existential suffering, but always delivered in this very immediate and really confrontational way.
Dude,
but anyway,
the third YouTube commenter is literally named Weltschmerz.
For real?
Yeah.
I didn't even see that. Okay, there you go. All right, so I'm a genius. Yeah. Anyway, so after that intro, this is another long song. Embracing the Slavery is a little over 12 minutes long. So like I said, a lot of these songs throughout Stabat Mater's catalog are actually based around these lead lines, like the one we hear in the intro. So now I'm going to play another long sample, which is how achingly, like 6 minutes later, we get back to it. And it is, I think, the pivotal climactic moment of the record as a whole.
This absolute need of weakness portrays itself. Repeat the melancholy epic alien of mankind.
Yeah, so, I mean, obviously that moment, that drop with those couple measures of feedback, I mean, that's the defining statement of the album. You know, we're about 2/3, 3/4 into the record as a whole. That is, to me, the moment that the entire record's been building up to, is the return to that little intro lead. And the recontextualization of it after all this ugliness and, like, the sort of, like, frustrated, repeating, dissonant chords leading up to it. And then you return to this, like, beautiful elegiac lead line, but now it has this, like, ugly, heavy turn at the end of the phrase. Sort of like when I talk about, what makes mutilation and mutilation-derived French black metal bands cool is the idea of having the beautiful melody that goes sour at the end, this inversion of sentiment. That's what happens here in a really kind of emotionally powerful way to me. This kind of getting back to the Torture Doom idea, this final release of humanity, that, we were able to etch out this, like, fragile, beautiful thing, and then we work through the sort of life cycle of this song, and it becomes indelibly corrupted at the end by the ugliness, the completed version of that riff is the one with the ugly ending, you know?
That's true. But I think something that's a little bit different from Mutilation is that Mutilation riffs often kind of the ugly riff hits and it kind of sighs or vomits. Mm-hmm. You know, or the ugly bit at the end makes the riff kind of sigh or vomit.
Yeah.
Here, the ugly bit hits with real power. And I was thinking when I listened to this, like for the Mutilation, kind of the ugly bit negates the power of the riff. It's like, help, I'm falling down in the alley, right? Mm-hmm. Which is the point, right? I mean, sometimes it just makes it nasty, okay, but often it's about, you know, the sort of wasting away or whatever. But in here, when he hits those bends, he's also, well, first of all, he's fulfilling something else. He's also calling back the bends in By the Seat of the Sun. Mm-hmm. And the frostish riffing that starts that sample. Like, we get the very end of a long frost passage. And it hits as, the fulfillment of the riff. Because you're absolutely right that it completes the riff. Because if you just finish that little, the consonant phrase, it just drops back down to the root, right? And you can go back and listen to the beginning of the song and hear it as incomplete. But then, when he hits the bend, he just drives it forward and makes it crushing. And I was thinking, man, Mikko Espa is one of the only people where I, hear some really soaring epic thing, and I, want him to fuck it up at the end. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, because you know that it's gonna... It's a lot of this record, interestingly enough, is kind of based on anticipation. You know, it's like... Mm-hmm. You know, he builds so much tension within these repeated chords, and you need it psychologically to end at some point. And it never ends in a nice way. It never ends in the sort of pat romantic way that a lot of, sort of romantic funeral doom does these days. It always ends in an ugly dissonant turn. But that dissonant turn has as much power as a real resolution would.
Yeah, I think that's what's important. It's he plays the beautiful phrase, and then he just drives it home. And it doesn't really negate the beauty of what came before. It sort of completes it in a cool way. And that is, granted he's playing, torture doom or funeral doom, but that is to do that that is also certainly, to be able to do that within a single riff is also a value in black metal songwriting, right? You could, that method applied to black metal songs yields, I'm sure I could find examples, yields results in a really cool way. But it's just, it's another, who were we talking about? I guess this is something that I've brought up a few times or been looking for, but it was all inspired by the Morte Incandescente, where the triumphant part was the ugly part.
Yeah.
Right? They would have these sort of quick gestures at consonant melody, all of which sounded like Transylvanian hunger. But then the real climax would be the bong dong bong 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 part.
Yeah. That's the part where you know you're alive.
Yes, yeah. And here it's not like the melody disharmony simultaneously thing like you get in Swedish black metal riffs or certain Norse ones. It's being able to do that kind of reversal within the riff and have the ugly part at the end make it even more I guess, really, the melodic phrase in itself does not have it's beautiful. It's, I think, elegiac, as you said. It's sort of mournful. It sort of soars upward, but it's also a little bit crestfallen, right? With the way it just drops off at the end, at the beginning of the song. And then the thing that makes it sound kind of triumphant is the hideous bend at the end. I think it's also worth noting that he's bending the notes upward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think you could fit this. I think you can still fit. I'm the way I'm pushing it, I think you can still very easily fit into your theological take on the record.
Oh yeah, the idea that we were talking about before we started. Oh yeah, well, I don't want to like put words in the artist's mouth, but I've always gotten this sense that so Stabat Mater is, if you look at some of the lyrics from previous Stabat Mater songs, brutally anti-Christian is probably an understatement. It is. There's something about the way Mikko Aspa writes lyrics that are genuinely troubling. But the way that sort of like intense hatred and aggression is juxtaposed against some of these melodic ideas makes me think that there's a strange sort of internal conflict, not in the sense that it's like, that we're dealing with a secret Christian, but that Mikko's personal obsession with some of these ideas and images has reached a point where he has some sort of intense philosophical relationship with them.
Well, keep going.
Oh no, that was about it. What did you have to say?
Well, so it's like, right, so you've identified a few things in the past as being sort of like Catholic guilt extreme metal, and you've suggested, I think, and it turns out possibly correctly, that Earache really does have some like not sort of inadvertent or guilty, but just some subtle Christian overtones. It seems like he's confirmed that. So you're not saying that about this record, but you're saying that by meditating in hatred on the sufferings of Christ and the Virgin Mary, he's connected to them somehow.
Yes, there is a personal relationship to those ideas.
And so that ties into a thing I was thinking earlier, which is that, like, when you hear this record, right, it's not necessarily true on a Clandestine Blaze record, but when you hear this record, you're like, oh, this is the vocalist of Deathspell Omega.
Yeah.
Like, that idea of sort of furious dialogue with Christianity in a way that is like, acknowledging it and sort of actively doing battle with it and trying to turn it against itself in strange ways and celebrating it in this sort of left-hand pathway, right? That is a very DSO thing.
Definitely. Yeah.
And so maybe, when you hear, like, there's some really good riffs on that last Clandestine Blaze thing, and you can certainly hear that it's elite black metal, but, like, this is like, oh, this is the guy, but it's also very straight ahead meat and potatoes in a way that we really liked, right? And when you hear this record, it has that gut level punch, even and especially in moments like that, but it's also like, oh, this is the guy who like is in Deathspell Omega.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
All right, so real quick to wrap it up. So the last song, Theater of Failure, is this is the shortest song on the record. It's only about 9 minutes long. And this feels to me like a sort of like really ugly coda to the whole thing. Like the album is sort of complete at the end of Embracing the Slavery. But then we've got this protracted horrible thing as sort of an epilogue to the record. And Theater of Failure is the track that's, to me, the closest to older Stabat Mater. You've got this, it's really rhythmically claustrophobic. The tones are way more blown out than the other songs. These textures sort of infiltrate and absorb the negative space of the reverb. You understand immediately that this guy has some sort of relationship to noise and power electronics, which of course he does, even though it doesn't feature any of those elements. And I'm starting to think that maybe early to mid-era Godflesh is really important to Mikko. Both in some of the like really beautiful lead lines you'll hear, as well as I'm gonna guess that like Selfless is kind of an important record to Mikko. I think he understands that on a really deep level.
Even the bends you could see having something Godfleshy about them.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, there's something about the way Mikko plays guitar for this project and the way he arranges things, especially on this track, the really dense, like, simultaneous interaction of the drums and guitars leaving these horrible gaps sounds like some of the most extreme moments of early Godflesh to me.
Oh, this is the one that has Go Spread Your Wings on it.
Yeah, Selfless has Go Spread Your Wings.
Selfless is. Yeah, well, that's basically a Torture Doom song. Yeah, I know this album. I know this album just through that song because a guy I knew pointed out that you could put it on the jukebox and for a single play get 20 minutes of soul-destroying noise that would drive people out of the bar.
Speaking of soul-destroying noise, Theater of Failure. There's a lot going on there, and all of it is horrible in a good way.
Dude, that last riff was nasty.
What the fuck, man? Yeah, it feels like the album is coming apart under its own weight, you know?
Well, yeah, although I think the way you described it led me to expect something that was just more hideous. You know, obviously I forgot exactly how it went. To me, that sounded very coherently heavy throughout. I mean, every riff just threw into the next one, and
it's definitely like heavy and coherent. But yeah, go ahead.
I get what you mean, that we're in a very different place emotionally from where we were at the at the climax of the record, and that this is sort of some sort of like earthward turn for sure. It's just so like, I mean, you can like headbang to it. Dude, that thing he did at the end, you said keep rolling it like twice, and what he started doing it was like he just did this like freaky psych rock melody, and then just like smashed it to bits. But even over the smashing riff, he starts playing things that sound like Sonic Youth harmonics, like arpeggios over it. Like, it's... And I mean, that ties into the Godflesh, I'm sure. Maybe there's shit like that. I'm sure there's shit
there's
Sonic Youth on Godflesh. Yeah. But yeah, lots of... Generally, a big feeling of, like, gut-level death doom aggression being filtered through a bunch of influences that are, like, totally in a different universe. Like, I was telling you at the beginning of that sample, it sounded like Melvins. Like Melvins, but good. I hate the Melvins. But, like gluey porch treatments or something, but like if those ideas had been like drawn out and made heavy instead of like people deliberately crippling riffs to prove their dislike for metalheads. It's you know, well, we were just arguing about Melvins in our notes. But anyway, point being, like, that is just, I mean, God, it's just so, I mean, I feel like by a passage like that, I'm just reduced to sounding like I'm 19, you know what I mean? I'm just like, dude, like, the fucking riffs are sick and crushing.
and the harsh vocals provide give a sense of hatred and anguish.